My name is Catherine Monroe, though most people call me Kate. I am 65 years old, a widow, and until recently I lived a quiet life in the town where my husband built his company. For decades I stood beside him, supporting his work, raising our only son, and keeping our home steady. After my husband passed away, I thought my life would fade into silence. I was wrong. The silence was broken not by grief, but by an ultimatum that shattered the last pieces of the family I thought I knew. I remember the night as if it had been branded into the walls of our kitchen. The overhead light hummed, casting a cold glare across the marble countertop. A stack of papers lay between us, heavy and official, waiting for my signature. At the top was a document that would give my daughter-in-law full control over my inheritance. She tapped the page with one manicured nail and said in a voice sharp enough to cut glass, "If you don't sign this, then Ethan will have to choose between you and me." The room was too still. The hum of the refrigerator, the faint click of the clock above the stove, even my own breathing seemed too loud. My son sat at the end of the table, eyes lowered, shoulders drawn forward as if he were already bracing for the fallout. His silence was more painful than any insult. I looked at the papers again. I thought of my husband's lawyer earlier that week, reading aloud the will that left me as the sole heir to his $60 million estate. Ethan and Amelia had sat in stunned silence, as though their world had been rearranged in front of them. That night, the echo of those words still lingered. I was the heir. I was the one my husband trusted. Amelia leaned closer, the glow of the LED light sharpening her features. "All you have to do is sign, then everything will be easier for everyone. Otherwise, Ethan has no choice. He must choose me or you." The cruelty of her words was deliberate. It was not about money alone. It was about power, about placing me in the corner, about making me small in the house where I had once been the heart. My son's hand rested near hers, but he did not reach for mine. That absence said more than any declaration. I felt the silver hairpin in my pocket, the one Richard had given me long ago when my hair first turned gray. I pressed it between my fingers and let its cold surface steady me. My voice, when it came, was almost a whisper. "No." The silence that followed cracked something open in the air. Amelia's lips tightened. Ethan shifted but said nothing. I picked up the papers, slid them back across the table, and rose from my chair. If you have ever been forced to stand your ground against the people closest to you, you know the kind of strength it requires. You know the quiet terror of realizing you might lose them forever. If you have ever faced that moment, stay with me. You will understand why I walked away that night. I stepped back, resting my hand on the counter to keep balance. The kitchen that once smelled of coffee and warm bread now smelled faintly of ink and the metallic chill of fear. Amelia folded the papers slowly, her eyes never leaving mine. "You'll regret this," she murmured. Maybe I would, but regret is different from surrender. My son finally lifted his head. For a second, I thought I saw the boy he once was, the child who used to run along the harbor with salt spray in his hair, laughing as Richard showed him the ropes of the docks. That boy was gone, hidden behind the weary man in front of me, silent because his wife had already spoken for him. I walked out of the kitchen with the hairpin still in my hand. Behind me, I heard the scrape of a chair, then silence again. No footsteps followed. The house was dark except for the kitchen light. My reflection stared back at me from the glass door leading to the porch, a woman suddenly untethered. The estate was mine by law, but that night it felt like it belonged to everyone but me. I paused at the threshold, the place where inside meets outside. My husband always believed thresholds carried weight, the moment you cross from one state of being to another. I pressed my palm against the cool glass and whispered his name. I did not know then how many more times I would whisper it before I found peace. When I finally turned back, Amelia's voice reached me from the kitchen, hushed but sharp. "She'll bend. She always does. Just wait." But I didn't bend. I closed the door to my room, and I began to think of the letters Richard had left behind, the logbooks I had yet to open, and the legacy that was both a gift and a burden. That night marked the beginning of a battle I had never wanted, one not fought with raised voices or slammed doors, but with documents, silence, and the kind of strength that does not announce itself. It was the night my daughter-in-law demanded what was mine, and my son allowed her to demand it. It was the night I realized that to keep my dignity, I would have to risk losing them both. I lay awake until dawn, the silver hairpin resting on the nightstand beside me, a reminder of who I was and who I still needed to be. The papers remained unsigned. My answer remained unchanged. And somewhere in the distance, Lake Michigan's waves carried the sound of my refusal out into the night. Tomorrow would bring another reckoning, but that night, in the cold glow of the kitchen light, I chose myself. The morning of the will reading felt like the air itself had weight. I wore Richard's navy blue scarf, the one that still carried the faint trace of his cologne, and I walked into Gregory Blake's office with steady steps. The room smelled of old leather and polished wood. Books lined the shelves in orderly rows, and on the table lay a folder thick with documents. Gregory rose to greet me, his silver hair catching the light from the window. He had been our lawyer for more than 30 years, a man Richard trusted as if he were family. "Kate," he said softly, with the kind of voice that carried both condolence and formality. He gestured for me to sit at the long table, and I did, my hands folded neatly in my lap. Ethan and Amelia arrived moments later. She swept in first, heels clicking against the hardwood, her dress pristine, her eyes sharp and restless. Ethan followed, shoulders slightly hunched, his face pale as though he hadn't slept. He gave me a quick glance, then looked away. Gregory cleared his throat, the sound pulling every gaze toward him. "We are here to read the last will and testament of Richard Monroe," he began. His voice was steady, practiced, but I could see the flicker of grief in his eyes as he said Richard's name. He opened the folder, adjusted his glasses, and began. I listened to the words I had dreaded and yet needed to hear. Richard appointed Gregory as executor, ensuring every instruction would be carried out to the letter. Then came the heart of it. Gregory read, "I, Richard Monroe, leave the entirety of my estate, valued at $60 million, to my wife, Catherine Monroe. It is my wish and command that she alone hold ownership and stewardship of all assets, properties, and accounts associated with the Monroe Harbor and logistics legacy." The silence after that sentence was thick enough to choke on. Amelia's lips parted, then closed again. Ethan blinked, as if the air had been knocked from his lungs. I sat perfectly still, though my heart pounded against my ribs. The estate, all of it, was mine. Amelia broke the silence first. "This must be a mistake," she said sharply. "Surely Richard wouldn't bypass his only son. Surely he would want the family legacy to continue." Her tone was polished, but her eyes burned with accusation. Gregory shook his head calmly. "This document was prepared, signed, and notarized with full legal authority. I can assure you there is no mistake." Ethan shifted in his chair, his jaw tightening. Why didn't he tell me? His voice was low, almost a whisper. Gregory turned another page, then removed an envelope sealed in Richard's familiar hand. He looked at me, then at Ethan, and placed the envelope carefully in front of me. "Richard left this for you, Kate. He asked that you open it today." My fingers trembled as I broke the seal. Inside was a single sheet of paper, Richard's handwriting steady and bold. "My dearest Kate, if you are reading this, then I am gone. I have chosen to leave everything in your hands because I know you will protect what we built, not sell it or squander it. If Ethan proves himself, there may be room for him to return. But if you find that you cannot trust him, then you must hold firm. Do not give away what belongs to you. You will know when the time comes. With all my love, Richard." I pressed the paper to my chest, the words burning into me. The ache of loss and the sting of betrayal were tangled together, impossible to separate. I looked up, and my son's eyes were on me, searching for an answer I could not give. Amelia leaned forward, her voice sharp. "So that's it? He gives everything to you, and Ethan is left with nothing? That is cruel. That is not justice." Gregory answered before I could. "The law is clear. Richard's wishes are binding. And to be frank, Mrs. Monroe, Richard had every right to decide how his estate would be passed." Amelia's gaze cut through him like a blade, then turned back to me. "You can still change this. You can sign over the assets, transfer them, or put Ethan in charge. He is the rightful heir." I met her eyes without flinching. "Richard made his choice, and I will honor it." Ethan shifted again, his hands clenching and unclenching on the table. For a moment, I thought he might speak, that he might plead or even apologize, but the words never came. He lowered his head, and the silence between us grew heavier. Gregory gathered the documents back into the folder, his expression unreadable, but his loyalty unmistakable. "There is one more matter," he said quietly. "Richard placed the harbor itself in a trust. It cannot be sold or divided. It is protected, meant to stand as it always has. He believed the harbor was the heart of this community, and he wanted to ensure it would remain that way." Amelia sat back, her lips pressed into a thin line. Ethan exhaled slowly, his shoulders sagging. The trust was another wall, another layer of protection Richard had built around me, around us, even from beyond the grave. As the meeting ended, I rose with the letter still in my hand. Amelia whispered something sharp to Ethan, but he didn't respond. I walked out of Gregory's office and into the daylight, the sun glaring off the windshield of my car. I slid the letter back into its envelope and held it close. Richard had trusted me to know when to stand my ground, and I had just been given my first test. I thought of the kitchen the night before, of Amelia's ultimatum and Ethan's silence. Now I understood why Richard had written what he did. He must have seen the same cracks I had refused to see. He must have known this moment was coming. I started the car, but before I pulled away, I let the letter rest on my lap. "I will not fail you, Richard," I whispered. The harbor, the company, the estate, they were mine to guard now. And though the cost might be high, I would not surrender them. I drove back to the apartment where I had been living since Richard passed. It wasn't grand, just a quiet place overlooking the park, a temporary space I thought would give me time to breathe. As I approached, I noticed something unusual. The doorman, who usually greeted me with a polite nod, avoided my eyes. A guard I had never seen before stood by the entrance, posture stiff, gaze cold. I slowed my steps, clutching the scarf around my neck. "Good evening," I said, trying to pass. The guard shifted, blocking the way. "I'm sorry, ma'am," he said flatly. "Your access has been revoked. You'll need to speak with management." The words sliced through me like ice. "Revoked?" I repeated. "This is my apartment." Before he could respond, Ethan appeared from the lobby. He looked disheveled, his tie loosened, his eyes darting anywhere but at me. "Mom," he began, his voice soft but unsteady. "There's been a change." Behind him, Amelia stepped forward. She wore a thin smile, the kind that revealed more contempt than kindness. Her hand slid over Ethan's arm like a claim. "The lease was under a corporate LLC," she explained sweetly. "We've terminated it, effective immediately." I stared at her, then at my son. The air between us was heavy, thick with betrayal. "You terminated my lease?" I asked quietly. Ethan shifted his weight. "It's complicated," he muttered. "We thought it would be best." "Best for whom?" My voice trembled, but I did not raise it. "Your father and I paid for that lease. That was my home." Amelia tilted her head, her expression dripping with false sympathy. "It's nothing personal. You'll be better off at the estate by the lake. It's larger, more fitting for someone in your position." Her words were poison dressed in courtesy. I felt the weight of the suitcase in my hand grow heavier, though I had not yet packed it. I realized then that I no longer had a choice. A guard brought out 2 suitcases already packed, boxes stacked neatly behind him. My belongings had been touched, moved, arranged by strangers. I saw Richard's coat folded carelessly on top, the fabric I had once pressed to my face now handled like an old rag. I stepped forward and lifted the coat into my arms, holding it tight. The faint scent of his cologne lingered, a reminder of the man who had built this family, who had trusted me to guard his legacy. Rain began to fall outside, tapping against the glass doors. I turned to Ethan one last time. His eyes flickered with something, shame perhaps, but it vanished as quickly as it appeared when Amelia's grip on his arm tightened. "You're really doing this?" I asked softly. "You're casting me out?" He looked at the floor. "It's just easier this way." Easier. The word echoed in my chest, hollow and cruel. He did not meet my gaze. He did not step forward. He let Amelia's silence speak for them both. I picked up the suitcase the guard had set down, my hands steady despite the storm inside me. The lobby that had once felt safe now felt foreign. The walls seemed closer, the light harsher. Each step toward the door was heavy, but I carried myself upright. Outside, the rain thickened, soaking through my scarf, plastering my hair against my forehead. I stood beneath the awning for a moment, adjusting the strap of my bag, before stepping into the storm. Behind me, the guard closed the door. The sound of the latch clicking into place was final. I walked down the street with the suitcase trailing behind me, the wheels rattling against the wet pavement. The city lights blurred in the rain, glowing like distant beacons I could not reach. Cars rushed past, their tires hissing on the soaked asphalt. No one stopped. No one knew that a mother had just been cut off by her only son. My shoes grew heavier with each step, the water seeping in. I reached for the silver hairpin in my pocket, pressing its cold metal against my palm. It steadied me, kept me from crumbling right there on the sidewalk. By the time I reached the corner, I stopped and looked back once. Through the sheets of rain, I could still see the faint glow of the apartment windows. Somewhere in there, Amelia and Ethan would be pouring themselves drinks, perhaps congratulating themselves on their decisiveness. I turned away before the thought could harden into bitterness. The cab I hailed splashed water against the curb as it stopped. The driver rolled down the window. "Need a ride?" he asked, voice muffled by the rain. I nodded, sliding the suitcase into the back. As I climbed in, I whispered to myself, "You will not break me." The car pulled away, leaving behind the place that had been my home. My reflection stared back at me from the wet glass, older, wearier, but unyielding. I thought of Richard's letter, the one I had pressed to my chest in Gregory's office. He had known this would happen. He had prepared me for this moment. As the cab turned toward the lake road, I closed my eyes and let the rhythm of the rain soothe me. I would go back to the estate Richard had left, the place where his presence lingered strongest. They could strip me of an apartment, but they could not strip me of who I was, nor of the trust he had placed in me. By the time we left the city lights behind, I opened my eyes and saw the faint outline of Lake Michigan in the distance. The waves rolled in under the storm, endless and dark, a reminder that even in turmoil, there was persistence. I pressed my forehead against the glass, whispering Richard's name once more. They had forced me out, but they had also forced me back to where I truly belonged. The drive north felt longer than I remembered, though I had traveled this road countless times with Richard. The rain eased as the city lights faded behind me, leaving only the winding road and the dark silhouette of trees. By the time the cab turned into the long gravel driveway, dawn was brushing the horizon. The lake stretched out like a sheet of pewter, restless under the early light. The estate stood quiet, tall windows reflecting the pale sky. It had been months since I last stepped foot inside. I fumbled with the old brass key Richard had pressed into my palm years ago, telling me it was always my refuge. The lock turned with a soft click, and I pushed open the heavy oak door. The smell of cedar and old books welcomed me. Dust lingered on the furniture, but the house carried Richard's presence in every corner. His leather chair still faced the window overlooking the water. A blanket was folded neatly on the armrest, as though he had only just left it there. I set my suitcase down in the hallway, listening to the echo of my steps. I walked room to room, touching surfaces as if to remind myself this place was still mine. The dining room table where we had hosted countless Christmas dinners, the study where Richard spent long nights writing in his logbooks, the fireplace where Ethan once sprawled on the rug with a toy ship in hand. The memories were everywhere, sharp and tender all at once. In the master bedroom, I opened the top drawer of Richard's old desk. Inside, beneath a stack of envelopes, I found a folded letter addressed to me. My hands trembled as I unfolded it, the paper fragile with time. My Kate, if you find this, you are standing in the house I loved most. Within these walls, you will find strength when the world feels unkind. I left an account separate from the others, a safeguard should Ethan's judgment ever falter. If you see it touched before its time, you will know the truth of his choices. Do not fear the silence that follows loss. Within silence lies clarity. Richard. I sank into the chair, the words pulling tears down my cheeks. He had foreseen it, the weakness in Ethan, the danger of trust misplaced. My heart ached not only for the betrayal unfolding, but for the weight Richard had carried, preparing for the day he would no longer be there to protect me. I reached into my bag and pulled out the silver hairpin, fixing it into place as I had done the night before. The cold metal against my scalp steadied me. I stood, letter in hand, and walked toward the study. Richard's logbooks filled the shelves, spines worn from years of use. I pulled one down, the leather cover cracked with age. His handwriting filled the pages, neat and deliberate. He had written everything: tides, shipments, weather, even small notes about the men who worked the docks. It was his way of holding the harbor together, one detail at a time. As I traced the ink with my fingers, a folded receipt slipped out. My breath caught when I read the numbers. It was a record of a withdrawal, Ethan's name scrawled at the bottom, a sum that matched what Marina would later confirm. The safeguard account had already been touched. I pressed the paper flat against the desk, my pulse pounding. My son had gone further than I had feared. It wasn't only ambition or his wife's influence. He had reached into his father's hidden reserve, the one meant to protect us all. The weight of it settled heavy on my chest. I closed the logbook carefully, slipping the receipt back between the pages. I could not crumble now. Richard had left me everything. Not because he wanted me to bear the pain alone, but because he knew I was the only one who would not break. I opened the window and let the morning air rush in. The scent of the lake filled the room, clean, sharp, and familiar. Waves slapped against the rocks below, steady as a heartbeat. I closed my eyes and listened, allowing the sound to calm me. I thought back to the day Richard and I first stood on this porch, watching the sun sink over Lake Michigan. He had wrapped his arm around me and said, "This view will outlast us all." Now, standing alone, I whispered his words back into the wind. The house would need care. The floors needed polishing, the drapes shaken, the gardens tended. But beneath the dust and silence, it was still a home. It was still the place Richard had trusted me to keep. I unpacked slowly, placing my clothes in the drawers, folding Richard's coat across the foot of the bed. In the kitchen, I set a kettle on the stove and watched the steam rise. I drank the tea with my hands wrapped around the cup, grounding myself in the warmth. By midday, I had opened more of Richard's drawers and files, piecing together the layers of his protection. Accounts he had closed, trusts he had opened, and quiet notes he had left only for me. Each page was a reminder that he had planned for this, that he had placed the burden and the strength into my hands. I stood once more at the window, staring out at the vast gray lake. The water moved endlessly, never still, never defeated. I felt a kinship with it then, knowing I too must keep moving, keep holding. Though I had been cast out from the apartment, though my son had turned his face away, I was not broken. I was standing where Richard wanted me to stand, holding the pieces he had left, preparing for the battles to come. That night, as the sun slipped beneath the horizon, I lit the fireplace in the living room. The flames flickered against the walls, chasing shadows into the corners. I sat in Richard's chair with his letter in my lap and whispered into the quiet, "I will not fail you." The house seemed to breathe with me, the logs crackling, the lake humming beyond the glass. I closed my eyes and let the warmth seep into my bones. This was not the end. This was only the beginning of the stand I would have to take. The following morning, I rose early. The estate was still cloaked in mist, the lake a soft blur of gray and silver. I wrapped Richard's scarf around my shoulders and sat at the kitchen table, staring at the stack of letters and receipts I had uncovered the night before. The discovery of Ethan's hand in the hidden account had left me sleepless, my mind turning over the betrayal again and again. But grief alone could not protect what Richard had left me. I needed help. I dialed Gregory Blake first. His voice on the line carried the calm steadiness of a man who had seen storms before. "Kate," he said, "I suspected they might move quickly after the reading. What happened?" "They've already touched the account," I replied. "Richard's reserve. Ethan signed for it." My voice was low, steady, but the ache behind the words bled through. Gregory's pause was long, deliberate. "That changes everything. Listen to me carefully. You cannot face this alone. Richard trusted me with every corner of his estate. If Ethan is reaching into funds that were meant to remain untouched, we can trace it. We can show intent. I'll come by this afternoon with the paperwork we'll need." I closed my eyes, relief loosening a knot in my chest. "Thank you, Gregory." After the call, I rang Marina Lopez. She had managed Richard's finances for more than 15 years, sharp-eyed and meticulous. When she arrived that afternoon, her briefcase was heavy with files. She spread them across the kitchen table, her brow furrowed as she flipped through the statements. Here, she said, tapping a page with her pen. A withdrawal of $280,000, labeled as consulting, but the funds went directly into Ethan's startup account. I cross-checked it with the credit lines he opened. He is drowning in debt, Kate. He's trying to plug holes in a sinking ship. Her words stung, though they only confirmed what Richard had hinted at in his letters. He knew, I whispered. Richard must have seen this coming. Marina looked at me carefully. If this goes to court, the evidence will be in your favor. But I suspect Amelia won't let it get that far. She will push, threaten, smear your name if she must. You need more than numbers. You need people. Her words carried me to the harbor the next day. The air smelled of salt and engine oil, gulls circling overhead as if they were eavesdropping. I found Tom Harris near the docks, clipboard in hand, directing a crew as they secured ropes. He was older now, his hair grayer than when I last saw him, but his eyes lit with recognition the moment he spotted me. "Mrs. Monroe?" he greeted, setting the clipboard aside. "It's been too long." I smiled faintly. "It has. I came because I need your help, Tom." We walked along the pier, the sound of waves slapping against the hulls of moored ships. I told him about the will, the estate, and Ethan's choices. His jaw tightened as I spoke. "Richard loved that harbor," Tom said finally. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small leather book, edges worn smooth. "He left this with me a few weeks before he passed, said it belonged with you when the time came." I took the book carefully. It was one of Richard's logbooks, filled with his neat handwriting. Alongside notes of tides and shipments were personal reflections, his worries about Ethan, his hope for the community, his determination to keep the harbor safe. I pressed the book to my chest, fighting the sting of tears. "He trusted you," I said softly. Tom nodded. "And I trust you, Mrs. Monroe. If Amelia tries to lay claim to the harbor, she won't get far. The men here know whose name built these docks. Richard made sure of it." By the time I returned to the estate, evening was falling. The kitchen table was crowded with Gregory's legal files, Marina's financial statements, and Richard's logbook. I sat down among them, the evidence of betrayal on one side and the proof of loyalty on the other. For the first time in weeks, I felt the faint stirrings of strength. When Gregory arrived later, his presence filled the room. He adjusted his glasses and looked at the spread before him. "This is a good start," he said. "With the financial trail Marina uncovered and the logbook Tom provided, we can build a defense that will hold against whatever Amelia throws at you." I looked at each of them, then back down at Richard's handwriting. "I don't want to fight for wealth," I said quietly. "I want to protect what he built, what he believed in, and I want to keep my dignity intact." Gregory leaned forward, his eyes steady. "Then we will do exactly that. But you must be prepared. They won't stop until they've tried every tactic." I nodded, my fingers brushing the silver hairpin in my hair. "Let them come. I am not afraid of losing money. I am afraid of losing myself, and I will not let that happen." For a long moment, the room was silent, filled only with the soft ticking of the clock on the wall. Then Marina spoke. "You are not alone, Kate. Richard may be gone, but he left you an army. We'll stand with you." That night, after they left, I walked to the window overlooking Lake Michigan. The water shimmered under the moonlight, vast and unyielding. I placed the logbook on the sill and whispered, "We're ready, Richard." The next morning, the estate was wrapped in a hush, the kind of silence that carries both peace and expectation. I brewed a pot of coffee and sat by the window, watching mist curl over Lake Michigan. The fire from last night had gone cold, leaving only the faint scent of ash in the air. For a brief moment, I allowed myself to believe the world outside could not reach me here. But the knock on the front door reminded me otherwise. When I opened it, I found Eleanor Briggs standing on the porch with a basket in her hands. Her silver hair was swept neatly into a bun, and her eyes, sharp, discerning, yet kind, met mine with warmth. "I thought you could use fresh bread," she said, stepping inside without waiting for permission, as though she had always belonged in these rooms. I hadn't seen Eleanor in months, not since Richard's memorial service at the town courthouse. She had once been a respected judge, known for her fairness and her steady voice in the community. Now retired, she lived in the cottage down the road, close enough to watch the lake waves in the same way I did. We sat at the kitchen table, the basket between us, the bread still warm. She studied me for a long moment before speaking. "I heard whispers at the cafe. People are talking, Kate. They're saying Amelia has been busy planting seeds. Words like unstable, unfit, are making their way into conversations." I stiffened. "So soon?" Eleanor nodded. "She's clever, I'll give her that. But words only take root if they go unchallenged. Richard trusted you for a reason, and I believe the community will too, if given the chance to see the truth." I looked down at my hands, tracing the edge of the envelope that still held Richard's letter. "She gave me an ultimatum in my own kitchen," I confessed. "Sign over everything or lose Ethan. And now, they've already cut me out of my home." For a while, Eleanor said nothing. She broke a piece of bread, buttered it, and slid it toward me. Then she placed her own hand on the table, palm steady. "You are stronger than you feel right now. And you will not stand alone. I'll be your witness, if it comes to that. I've seen enough of these cases to know how they play out. She cannot win on lies if truth stands against her." Her words pierced the fog around me like a bell. "Why would you do that for me?" I asked quietly. She smiled faintly. "Because I remember Richard. He came to me once, years ago, worried about Ethan. He asked me what the law might do if his son ever strayed. I told him the law would always side with clarity. And now, here you are, with clarity in your hands. He believed in you, Kate. So do I." As she reached into her bag for a notebook, a paper slipped out, landing softly on the table. My eyes caught the bold letters across the top. Notice of past due balance. Ethan's name was printed in full, followed by numbers that painted a story of desperation. A failed investment in a technology startup, debts mounting, interest unpaid. Eleanor quickly gathered it, but not before I saw enough. "He's drowning," I murmured. Her eyes softened. "Yes, that is what desperation looks like, and desperation is dangerous when guided by someone like Amelia." I pressed my hands together, my chest tight. Richard's letter had warned me, Gregory had confirmed it, and now Eleanor's silent proof lay before me. Ethan was not only weak, he was compromised, burdened by mistakes he could not fix. Eleanor leaned closer, lowering her voice. "She'll use his weakness as her weapon. But remember, the law isn't on her side, and neither is conscience. When the time comes, I will stand with you." Her promise was steady, her presence grounding. For the first time in days, I felt the tremor in my heart ease. We spent the rest of the morning walking the garden. Eleanor pointed out the ivy climbing the stone walls, the roses Richard had once tended. "You see," she said, brushing her hand against the blossoms, "things survive winters. They bloom again." I thought about that as we stood side by side, the lake stretching endlessly before us. The waves whispered against the rocks, their rhythm both relentless and reassuring. Before she left, Eleanor placed her hand gently on my arm. "You will face storms, Kate, but storms do not last, and when the clouds clear, the harbor will still stand, and so will you." I watched her walk down the gravel path, her figure small against the wide sky. In her wake, the house felt less empty, the burden less unbearable. I went back inside, sat at Richard's desk, and opened the logbook again. His handwriting filled the page, steady as the waves outside. I whispered into the quiet room, "I will not falter." That evening the estate was hushed, as though the walls themselves knew what waited on the horizon. I moved through the rooms lighting lamps, their golden glow fighting against the deepening dusk. Outside, Lake Michigan stretched into shadows, the waves restless under a darkening sky. My phone buzzed on the counter. It was a message from Ethan. Short, clipped, without warmth. "Tomorrow at 9. Bring father's belongings." I stared at the screen until the letters blurred. It wasn't a request, not even a conversation. It was a summons, as though I were an intruder in my own life. I set the phone down slowly, my hands tightening around the edge of the counter. Gregory arrived first. He carried a leather briefcase and a look of quiet resolve. He spread documents across the kitchen table, his movements precise, deliberate. "I've prepared affidavits," he said. "Notary is on standby. Everything will be in order by morning." Next came Marina, her heels clicking on the wooden floor. She set down a stack of files so thick they threatened to topple. "I printed every statement," she said firmly. "Every transfer, every loan, every withdrawal. The trail is clear. They cannot deny what he's done." She opened one folder, tapping the line with her pen. $280,000 pulled straight from Richard's reserve. I've marked it. They will see the truth. Tom Harris followed, shoulders broad, the scent of sea air clinging to his jacket. He placed Richard's logbook gently on the table, as if it were a sacred object. "He wrote everything down," Tom said quietly. "Every shipment, every plan, every warning. This book is Richard's voice. It will matter." Finally, Eleanor arrived, her presence as steady as the tide. She carried no briefcase, no files, only her reputation and her word. "I'll be there in the morning," she said, settling into a chair. "I've seen enough cases to know how these games play. If Amelia thinks she can twist the law to her favor, she'll find herself cornered." The four of them gathered around me, their voices filling the kitchen in low, measured tones. They were strategists, guardians, and friends. But more than that, they were proof that I was not alone. I poured tea into mismatched cups, placing them before each of them. It felt almost like one of Richard's harbor meetings, the kind where he sat with his men late into the night, mapping tides and planning shipments. Only this time, the cargo was not crates of goods, but the legacy of an entire life. We talked through every detail. Gregory explained the legal steps. Marina laid out the financial records. Tom described the Harbor Council's loyalty, and Eleanor assured me that Amelia's threats of guardianship were smoke without fire. "It will not hold," she said firmly. "Not when truth is this clear." Still, as their voices wove together, I felt the heaviness pressing on me. My son would stand on the other side of that table in the morning. He would see me, not as his mother, but as an obstacle. The thought of it nearly broke me. I slipped my hand into my pocket and touched the silver hairpin. Its cool metal steadied me, anchoring me in silence. The night stretched on. After my allies departed, the house grew quiet again. I walked into the study, Richard's logbook under my arm. I placed it on his desk, beside the lamp he had always left burning. I opened to a random page. His handwriting filled the lines, steady, deliberate. At the bottom of one entry, he had written, "Hold the line, even in the storm." I traced the words with my finger. The storm was coming. Tomorrow at 9, it would break open. I closed the book and looked out the window. The waves of Lake Michigan crashed harder now, a rhythm both wild and steady. I imagined Richard standing there beside me, his hand on my shoulder, his voice reminding me that strength was not always loud. Sometimes strength was the refusal to step aside. Before I went to bed, I stood in front of the mirror and studied my reflection. The lines of age were etched into my face, my eyes ringed with exhaustion, yet I saw something there I hadn't seen in a long time. Resolve. I whispered into the darkened room. I am not afraid of losing money. I am afraid of losing myself, and I will not let that happen. The house was silent, the fire gone out, the mist creeping once more across the lake. I lay in bed with Richard's coat draped over the chair and his words echoing in my mind. The storm was almost here, but so was the dawn. The morning broke with a thin veil of fog hanging over the lake. I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of chamomile tea cooling in my hands when Gregory arrived. He didn't bother with pleasantries. He set his briefcase on the table, opened it, and slid a printed email toward me. The subject line alone sent a chill through me. Petition for guardianship review. It came late last night, Gregory said, his voice calm but edged with warning. Amelia's lawyer filed a preliminary notice. She's going to argue you're unfit to manage the estate. The words hung in the air like a dagger. For a moment, I simply stared at the page, my tea forgotten. Unfit. The accusation was more cutting than anything Amelia had yet thrown at me. It wasn't just about money anymore. It was about dignity, identity, my very right to stand on my own 2 feet. I forced myself to read the text. It was written in sharp legal language, every phrase designed to wound without saying so directly. They claimed I was fragile, grieving, vulnerable to manipulation. They painted a picture of a widow lost in confusion, incapable of protecting $60 million worth of assets. I felt my chest tighten. They want to make me a ward, I whispered, almost to myself. Gregory adjusted his glasses, leaning closer. It's a scare tactic. She's hoping you'll panic, give up control before it goes further. But the law is not on her side. You are of sound mind, Kate. No court would declare otherwise, not with witnesses like Eleanor and records this clean. At that moment, Eleanor herself walked in, her cane tapping softly against the floor. She had insisted on joining us that morning, saying she wanted to hear everything firsthand. When Gregory explained, she pursed her lips, then gave a low, steady laugh. Guardianship? That's her play. Eleanor shook her head. I presided over dozens of these cases. They rarely succeed and never without medical proof. This is smoke and mirrors. Amelia is banking on fear, not fact. I looked between them, my heart still unsteady. But she's spreading rumors already. People at the cafe, the council, what if they believe her? Eleanor reached across the table, laying her hand gently over mine. Kate, listen to me. Rumors fade. Evidence stands. When the time comes, I will testify myself. I'll tell the court what I know of you, of Richard, of the years you've kept this family steady. They will not question your capacity once I speak. Her certainty steadied me more than the tea in my hands. I breathed deeply, letting her words sink into the cracks Amelia had tried to widen. Marina arrived shortly after, carrying another stack of files. She listened quietly as Gregory and Eleanor explained, then opened her binder to reveal the evidence of Ethan's financial missteps. If Amelia wants to claim you're unfit, Marina said, tapping the papers, we'll show the court who's really unfit to handle responsibility. These withdrawals, these debts, Ethan cannot escape them. The contrast will speak louder than her accusations. For a moment, the 4 of us sat together in the kitchen, the morning sun breaking weakly through the fog and streaming across the table. Around me were law, finance, testimony, and friendship. 4 pillars holding me upright. Richard had known I would need them. He had placed these people in my path long before I realized how much I would lean on them. I thought again of Amelia's words in my kitchen, her demand that I sign or lose Ethan. She believed intimidation could break me. She believed whispers could redefine me. But she did not understand that silence is not weakness. Silence can be a wall, stronger than shouting, higher than lies. I folded the email carefully and slipped it back into Gregory's folder. "Let her try," I said, my voice low but steady. "I will not hand over what Richard trusted me to guard. Not to her, not to anyone." Gregory gave a small nod of approval. "Then tomorrow at 9, we stand together. The harbor will not belong to her. The estate will not belong to her. You will show them all that you are exactly who Richard believed you to be." The clock on the wall ticked softly, each second bringing me closer to the confrontation. I reached into my pocket, touching the silver hairpin as though it were a talisman. Its cold weight anchored me to the present, to the strength I still carried. Outside, the lake stirred, waves brushing against the shore in a steady rhythm. I let the sound wash over me, a reminder that no matter how fierce the storm, the water always returns to calm. Tomorrow would be the test. Tomorrow, in that room, Amelia would expect to see me isolated and cornered. But she would find something else instead. I lifted my chin, looking each of my allies in the eye. "Then tomorrow," I said softly, "we let her see who truly stands beside me." Morning came with a sky of steel gray, the kind of light that seems to strip away all softness. At exactly 9 o'clock, I stood inside the conference room at Gregory's office, the long oak table polished to a mirror shine. My hands rested on the leather cover of Richard's logbook. Beside me, the people who had chosen to stand with me arranged themselves with quiet dignity. Gregory with his stack of legal documents, Marina with her folders of financial statements, Tom with the logbook he had safeguarded, and Eleanor, whose very presence radiated authority. The door opened sharply, and Amelia strode in first, her heels snapping against the hardwood floor like a drumbeat of war. Ethan followed behind, his shoulders tense, his eyes downcast. He avoided my gaze, as though meeting it might break him. Amelia surveyed the room, expecting me to be alone. When she saw the others, her smirk faltered for just a moment before she masked it with a polished smile. "Well," she said, lowering her bag onto the table, "I didn't expect an audience, but no matter. This won't take long." Gregory adjusted his glasses and spoke first, his voice calm, but edged with steel. "It will take as long as it needs to. This meeting is not theater, Amelia. It is about Richard's estate, his harbor, his legacy, and we are here to ensure it remains intact." She leaned back in her chair, her eyes sharp. "Richard's legacy belongs to his son. Everyone knows that. But since you're all so intent on posturing, perhaps we should let the documents speak." Marina opened her folder and slid several sheets across the table. "Then let's begin. These are bank statements, traced transfers, and loan applications signed by Ethan. $280,000 pulled directly from Richard's reserve account. Funds earmarked for the harbor, not personal ventures. We have every detail recorded." Ethan's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Amelia reached for the papers, flipping through them quickly, then set them aside with a flick of her hand. "A business risk," she said coolly, "one that will pay off in time." Tom leaned forward, his weathered hands resting on the logbook. "Pay off? Richard kept this harbor alive for 40 years because he never gambled with people's livelihoods. He wrote it down day after day. Every tide, every shipment, every man paid on time. He trusted me to guard this record, and now I give it to his wife. This is what responsibility looks like." His voice carried the salt of the sea, the weight of decades. Even Ethan glanced at him, a flicker of guilt crossing his features before he dropped his gaze again. Eleanor cleared her throat, her tone calm but commanding. "And as for Amelia's talk of guardianship, let me say this clearly. I spent years on the bench. I know the law, and I know the standards. Kate is of sound mind, steady judgment, and full capacity. No court would strip her of what is rightfully hers. To suggest otherwise is not only insulting, but baseless." I sat quietly through it all, my hand on Richard's logbook, my hairpin pressing gently against my scalp. Finally, I looked at my son. "Ethan," I said softly, "do you remember the summer you painted the boat with your father? You were 15. You spent hours out there, your hands stained with paint, your laughter echoing across the water. He believed you might inherit more than the harbor. He believed you might inherit his love for it." Marina shifted a page, and as she did, a photograph slipped free and fluttered onto the table. Ethan froze when he saw it. The picture showed him at 15, paint streaked across his cheek, standing proudly beside Richard and the half-finished boat. His smile in that photo was unguarded, innocent, filled with a light that had long since dimmed. I picked up the photograph and slid it toward him. My voice trembled, but I held it steady. "That boy had his father's trust. That boy had mine. I don't know where he went, Ethan, but I still see him when I look at you." His hands shook as he picked up the picture. For a moment, his eyes softened, and the room seemed to hold its breath. But Amelia touched his arm, and the spell broke. His jaw tightened once more, and he set the photo down without a word. I straightened in my chair, looking from one face to another. My words came slow, deliberate, heavy with meaning. "I am not afraid of losing money. I am afraid of losing myself, and I will not allow that. Richard trusted me to hold the line, and I will." The silence that followed was thick, electric. Amelia's smile was gone now, replaced by the hard lines of frustration. Gregory's hands rested on the documents like a shield. Marina's eyes gleamed with determination. Tom sat solid and steady, the logbook before him. And Eleanor, regal as ever, gave a small nod of approval. Amelia rose abruptly, gathering her papers with a sharp motion. "This isn't over," she snapped, her voice trembling with anger. "You can't keep him from what's his forever." I rose meeting her eyes without flinching. "What belongs to Richard will remain where he placed it, with me, with the harbor, with the community he loved. You may fight me, Amelia, but you will not break me." Her glare could have cut glass, but she said nothing more. She turned on her heel, dragging Ethan with her. He glanced back once, the photograph still lying on the table, before following her out the door. When the room finally settled, I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. My allies remained around me, the logbook, the papers, the truth all laid out like weapons sharper than any blade. The storm had broken. But the fight was far from finished. The hours after the confrontation passed in a blur, but by evening, the weight of it all pressed hard on my shoulders. I walked the halls of the estate, Richard's coat folded across my arm, his words echoing in my mind. The harbor was safe for now, the documents and testimony stacked like stones in a fortress. Yet I knew the true fracture was not with Amelia, but with Ethan. That night, as the lamps glowed low and the lake whispered against the shore, I asked Gregory to stay behind after the others had left. He sat across from me in the study, his hands folded neatly, his eyes reflecting both loyalty and sorrow. I opened Richard's logbook to a page I had found earlier, one I had not dared read aloud before. "Gregory," I said quietly, Richard once told me he had considered handing the company to Ethan. Do you know if that was true? Gregory's expression tightened. He hesitated, then gave a slow nod. It was true. For years, Richard believed Ethan would be the one to carry the harbor forward. He wanted it. He planned for it. But then he began to see doubts. I swallowed hard, my hands trembling on the edges of the book. What kind of doubts? Gregory drew a breath. Ethan came to him one evening, years ago. He spoke about selling the docks to developers. He painted a picture of gleaming condos, luxury storefronts, a future that erased the grit and the men who had worked there all their lives. Richard listened, but that night he closed the book on the idea of passing it down. He told me later, "The harbor is not for sale. Not now, not ever. And if my son cannot see that, then he cannot inherit it." The words pierced me like a blade, both truth and grief intertwined. My heart ached as if Richard himself had just spoken them in the room. I lowered my gaze to the ink before me, the neat handwriting that had outlived him. Later that evening, Ethan came to the estate. I heard the crunch of tires on gravel, the slam of a car door, footsteps approaching. When I opened the door, he stood there, his face pale, eyes restless. He did not come alone. Amelia lingered in the car, her silhouette stiff behind the glass. "Mom?" he said, voice low, uncertain. "Can we talk?" I let him in. He stood awkwardly in the foyer, staring at the photographs on the wall. One showed him as a boy on Richard's shoulders, the two of them laughing, the harbor in the background. He looked at it longer than I expected. We moved into the study. The logbook was still open on the desk, the fire burning low in the hearth. He sat opposite me, his hands clasped tight as though he were holding himself together. "I never meant for it to go this far," he said finally. "But Amelia, she pushes. She thinks we're owed something. She thinks I was cheated." I studied him quietly. "Do you believe her?" His silence was heavy. He looked down, then whispered, "I thought Dad would leave it to me. I always thought it would be mine." I opened the logbook, turned it toward him, and pointed to Richard's words. "He wanted to, Ethan, but you spoke of selling the harbor, of turning it into glass towers. That's when he changed his mind. He told Gregory himself. He gave it to me because he knew I would keep it whole." Ethan's face crumpled, the truth striking him harder than any accusation could. His hands trembled as he read the words. "He never told me," he whispered. I leaned forward, my voice soft but unyielding. "He wanted to believe in you. He waited for you to see what he saw. The harbor, the people, the legacy. But you chose differently. And now you stand on the edge of losing yourself to someone else's ambition." Tears gathered in his eyes, though he blinked them away quickly. He closed the logbook and pushed it gently back toward me. "I don't know how to fix it," he admitted, his voice hoarse. For the first time in years, I reached across the table and touched his hand. "You fix it by remembering who you were. The boy who painted the boat beside his father, who laughed in the spray of the lake. That boy would never have sold this harbor. That boy is still in you, if you let him breathe." For a long moment, silence filled the room. The fire crackled softly, the waves outside beating their endless rhythm against the shore. Ethan's grip on my hand was weak, hesitant, but it was there. Then, from outside, Amelia's horn blared. He pulled away quickly, his shoulders stiffening once more. Without another word, he rose and walked to the door. I did not stop him. I only called after him, my voice carrying the weight of both love and sorrow. "Ethan, your father believed in second chances. Don't waste yours." The door closed behind him, the the sound echoing through the halls of the estate. I sat alone in the study, Richard's words open before me, tears streaming unchecked down my face. The truth had been spoken at last. It was the kind of truth that heals and wounds in equal measure, and it left me both lighter and lonelier than I had ever been. The next morning, I went into town for the first time in weeks. The air carried the faint chill of autumn, crisp enough to sting the lungs. I walked into the cafe where Richard and I had once spent countless quiet mornings, sipping coffee and watching the harbor come alive. The bell above the door chimed and heads turned. Conversations hushed for just a moment before resuming in softer tones. I ordered a small black coffee and sat near the window. It didn't take long before the whispers reached me. Two women at the next table leaned close, their voices low but sharp enough to carry. "They say she's not well," one murmured. "Losing touch. Poor thing doesn't know what she's doing." The other shook her head. "And with all that money? Someone should be watching her. That daughter-in-law of hers. She's the only one with sense." I stirred my coffee slowly, each word cutting deeper than the last. It wasn't anger I felt, but a heavy sorrow. Amelia's poison had begun to spread. The rumors were not shouted, but sown carefully in quiet corners where they could grow unchecked. Later that afternoon, the Harbor Council convened in the town hall. It was a modest building, its wood-paneled walls filled with photographs of ships, fishermen, and generations of families who had worked the docks. I sat in the back row, accompanied by Marina and Tom. The room buzzed with conversation until the chairperson called the meeting to order. Almost immediately, Amelia rose from her seat near the front. She wore a tailored suit, her hair gleaming under the overhead lights, her voice polished and firm. "We must ask ourselves," she began, "whether Mrs. Monroe is capable of managing the harbor's future. With the size of the estate and the complexity of the business, stability is crucial. And frankly, I fear she may not have the clarity to shoulder it." The words rippled through the room. I felt every eye flick toward me, some curious, some doubtful. My chest tightened, but I kept my hands folded in my lap. Before the weight of silence could smother me, a council member stood up. He was a younger man, the son of a longshoreman who had worked under Richard. His brow was furrowed, his voice steady. "If we're questioning stewardship, perhaps we should be looking elsewhere. I've seen records. Ethan has been withdrawing funds, hundreds of thousands, gone into ventures that have nothing to do with this harbor. Can we really pretend that's responsible?" The room shifted, murmurs rising. Amelia's eyes flashed, but she recovered quickly, forcing a smile. "Business risks are part of growth. Surely you understand that." Marina stood, holding a folder of papers. "What you call business risks nearly bankrupted him. These are official statements, reviewed and verified. This community deserves to know the truth. Richard Monroe left protections in place because he foresaw this very danger." Tom added his voice, deep and steady as the lake itself. "Richard knew what mattered. He gave this harbor to Kate because he trusted her to guard it, not gamble it. Every man and woman who works these docks knows it, and I'll stand by that truth as long as I draw breath." The murmurs grew into a current of support, faces turning from Amelia's practiced smile to the quiet certainty in Tom's words. Eleanor, seated near the aisle, rose with her cane. Her voice carried the authority of years on the bench. "I spent decades weighing truth against lies. I know manipulation when I hear it. Kate Monroe is not unstable. She is not incapable. She is a woman of sound mind, and she carries the trust of her late husband, a man who built this harbor with his own hands. If anyone wishes to dispute that, they may take it to court, and I assure you, they will lose." The hall fell silent, her words echoing like a gavel strike. Amelia's smile cracked, the mask slipping just enough for everyone to glimpse the ambition beneath. She gathered her papers with sharp movements, her jaw tight. I remained seated, my heart pounding, my face calm. I had not spoken a word, but the truth had spoken for me. The community had seen it. The poison of rumors had been met with antidote, not by shouting, but by evidence and loyalty. When the meeting adjourned, people approached me quietly. Some placed hands on my shoulder, others offered small nods of respect. Their gestures were simple, but they carried weight. As I stepped outside, the evening sun dipped low over the water, casting the harbor in gold. The ships rocked gently, ropes creaking, gulls crying overhead. For the first time in weeks, I felt the rumors lift, replaced by something sturdier. Trust. Amelia passed by me on the steps, her heels striking the wood with sharp precision. She didn't speak, but her glare told me enough. The battle was not finished. Yet in that moment, standing on the steps of the town hall, I felt Richard's hand in mine once more. That night the house was unusually still, the kind of quiet that seeps into the bones. After the council meeting, after the long stares and whispered support, I returned to the estate carrying both relief and sorrow. I moved through the darkened rooms with only a single lamp in my hand, the floor creaking under each step. My body was tired, but my heart refused rest. In the bedroom, Richard's coat hung neatly over the back of a chair. The fabric was worn at the elbows, faintly frayed at the cuffs, but it carried his shape as though he had just stepped out of it. I reached for it, fingers trembling, and pressed it against my face. The scent was still there, subtle but unmistakable. The woodsy cologne he had worn for years, mixed with salt from the harbor air. My chest ached as though the coat itself had breathed life back into the hollow spaces he left behind. I sank into the chair with the coat wrapped around me. The weight of it was familiar, grounding. My eyes closed, and in the silence of the room I could almost hear his voice. Soft, steady, the way he always spoke when storms, real or otherwise, threatened to shake me. "You'll know what to do," the memory of him whispered. Tears slipped down my cheeks. I clutched the lapels, tighter, as though holding them might tether him closer. In that moment, the battles with Amelia, the rumors, even Ethan's silence, all of it faded. What remained was grief, raw and unadorned. I let it wash over me because I could not fight it any longer. The fire in the hearth had burned low, but I coaxed it back to life with trembling hands, the warmth filling the edges of the room. Shadows danced across the walls, bending and stretching like the tides. I sat curled in his coat, letting memory sweep me back. I saw him as he was years ago, standing on the pier with his arms folded, surveying the harbor at dawn. I remembered the way he laughed when Ethan painted the boat for the first time, streaks of color across his cheeks, his pride unhidden. I remembered long drives by the lake, his hand resting on mine, silence between us as comfortable as breath. The ache of those memories was almost unbearable, yet they were the same memories that steadied me. They reminded me that my life had been built on more than betrayal and loss. It had been built on decades of quiet devotion, on a man who believed in me enough to entrust me with everything he had. I whispered his name into the coat. Richard. The syllables cracked in my throat, but I spoke them again, softer, until the word became both prayer and anchor. For a long time, I simply sat, the minutes bleeding into hours, the storm inside me slowly ebbing. Eventually, my tears quieted, replaced by a calm resolve. I laid the coat carefully across my lap, smoothing the creases with deliberate care, as though I were smoothing the lines of my own heart. "You'll know what to do." His voice lingered, not from memory now, but from faith. I understood then that his legacy was not the harbor alone, nor the millions in accounts, nor even the estate on the lake. His legacy was trust. Trust that I would stand when standing seemed impossible. I rose at last and draped the coat gently across the bed, my hand lingering on the collar. The house no longer felt so empty. The silence no longer felt so cruel. It had become, in some way, a companion. I blew out the lamp and stood for a moment in the dark, listening to the faint sound of the lake outside. The waves kept their rhythm, steady and eternal, carrying with them the reassurance that even in grief there is continuity. I whispered once more, this time not in sorrow but in promise. "I will not fail you." The following week, I opened the doors of the estate not for lawyers or advisors, but for neighbors, students, and workers who had known Richard's name long before it was written on headlines or contracts. The dining room was transformed into a gathering hall. Chairs, borrowed from the church, lined neatly in rows, the long table covered in simple cloth. On it rested Richard's logbook, a framed photograph of him at the harbor, and a stack of papers that bore the first charter of something new, the Richard Monroe Scholarship Fund. I stood at the head of the room as people filed in, their footsteps muffled against the old wooden floors. There were young faces, eyes wide with hope, and older ones weathered by years of dockside labor. Marina and Tom welcomed them at the door. Eleanor moved gracefully among them with her cane, offering quiet words of assurance. When the room settled, I stepped forward. My hands trembled slightly, but the silver hairpin steadied me, cool against my temple. "Thank you for coming," I began, my voice carrying farther than I expected. Richard believed the harbor was more than a business. He believed it was a lifeline. He believed in the men who rose before dawn, in the families who sacrificed, in the children who dreamed beyond the waves. He wanted this place, and its people, to endure. I held up the logbook, pages splayed like wings. He wrote everything here, not just tides and shipments, but his thoughts, his fears, his hopes. He left this harbor to me, but it was never meant for me alone. That is why today, I announce the creation of the Richard Monroe Scholarship Fund. Each year, students from harbor families will receive support to pursue education, to step into futures their parents once only dreamed of. The murmurs rose, a wave of surprise and gratitude. A boy of about 16 stood near the back, his cap clutched in his hands. His voice was nervous but clear. "My father worked the docks for Mr. Monroe. He never missed a shift, even when his back gave out. But there were weeks he came home empty because the money never came. If this fund had been here then, I might not have had to leave school. Thank you, Mrs. Monroe." The words pierced me with both pride and sorrow. Richard had spoken often of the missed wages, the struggles he wished he could ease. Now, through this fund, his promise lived on. Tom placed a hand on the boy's shoulder, his voice gruff. "Your father's loyalty will not be forgotten, and neither will yours." Eleanor rose slowly, steadying herself with her cane. "I have presided over many courts," she said firmly. "But justice is not always found in verdicts. Sometimes it is found in choices like this, when dignity and compassion prevail over greed and ambition. Today, justice belongs to this community, and it carries Richard's name." Applause filled the room, not loud but deep, the kind that rises from the heart rather than the hands. Faces softened, eyes glistened. I felt Richard's presence as if he were standing just behind me, his hand resting on my shoulder, his smile quiet but proud. After the gathering, I walked with a few students out to the porch. The air was crisp, the lake shimmering in the afternoon sun. One by one, they stepped across the threshold into the house, their shoes squeaking softly against the old wood. I lingered at the doorway, watching them pass, struck by the symbolism of it all. Each child crossing that threshold carried forward Richard's legacy, not in wealth, but in opportunity. A young girl, no more than 12, paused beside me. She held her mother's hand tightly, her eyes wide with wonder. "Will the scholarships really last?" she asked in a small voice. I knelt so we were eye to eye. "Yes," I told her gently. "As long as there are children who dream, they will last." She smiled shyly and stepped inside. The house, once a refuge of grief, now echoed with voices of life. For the first time since Richard's passing, I felt the estate breathe again. It no longer belonged only to me. It belonged to the community, to the children, to the future. As the sun dipped lower and the families departed, I stood at the edge of the porch, gazing out at Lake Michigan. The water gleamed gold, the waves carrying with them a rhythm older than any of us. I touched the silver hairpin and whispered, "We did it, Richard. They see you still." The day of Richard's memorial arrived with skies the color of pearl, soft clouds drifting lazily across the horizon. The town had gathered by the harbor where he had spent most of his life. Rows of folding chairs lined the pier, the air filled with the mingled scents of lake water and blooming autumn chrysanthemums. At the center stood a stone bench newly carved, its inscription simple but profound. He kept the harbor safe. I wore a dark dress and Richard's navy scarf. The fabric still held faint traces of his cologne, the familiar comfort I carried whenever the weight of the world pressed too hard. As I approached the bench, the murmur of voices fell quiet. Friends, workers, students, neighbors, all had come, drawn not by obligation, but by memory and gratitude. Marina stood with the scholarship students in the front row, their youthful faces bright against the solemn air. Tom and his crew had set down their tools for the day, standing in neat lines like sailors awaiting orders. Eleanor sat with her cane resting across her lap, her posture upright, her gaze firm, a silent sentinel of truth. I stepped up to the podium, my hands steady on the wooden sides. The lake stretched behind me, its waters shimmering under the pale sun. I let the hush of the crowd wash over me before I spoke. Richard Monroe was not a man of many speeches, I began. He believed a steady hand and an honest day's work spoke louder than any words. But today, we gather because his presence cannot be measured in silence alone. It is in the harbor he kept, the ships he guided, the men and women he paid fairly, the families who depended on him. It is in this town that remembers him as more than a businessman. He was a guardian. I paused, my throat tightening. My fingers brushed against the scarf at my neck, grounding me. He taught me that legacy is not only in the wealth you leave, but in the dignity you protect. And though he is gone, his work remains here, with all of us. That is why this bench stands today, not as an ending, but as a promise that his watch over the harbor continues. A hush followed, broken by the sound of gulls overhead. Then a young man rose from the front row, one of the first scholarship recipients. His voice was nervous, but strong. I didn't know Mr. Monroe well, but I know my father did. He said Mr. Monroe never missed paying a man for his work, even when times were hard. Because of this scholarship, I'll be the first in my family to go to college. That is the kind of legacy that lasts. Applause spread softly through the crowd. My chest swelled with quiet pride, the kind that stings with both joy and sorrow. As the gathering ended, I turned to lay a single rose on the bench. The petals were crimson, vivid against the pale stone. I whispered his name as I placed it down. For a moment, I let myself imagine his hand in mine, his voice steady in my ear. When I rose, my eyes caught movement at the edge of the crowd. Ethan stood apart, half hidden behind a cluster of townsfolk. He wore a dark suit, his tie askew, his face pale. He did not move forward, did not call my name. He only stood there, watching, his eyes locked on the bench. The sight of him brought a rush of memories. The boy who once ran across the docks, the young man who dreamed big but faltered, the son who had allowed silence to speak louder than love. His gaze lingered, torn between regret and restraint. He took a hesitant step closer, then stopped. For a long moment he simply stood there, his hands clenched at his sides, his eyes shining with something unspoken. Then he turned, walked back toward the road, and disappeared into the waiting car where Amelia sat behind the wheel. I did not call after him. I did not chase. Some moments speak louder in silence than any words ever could. His absence at my side that day was painful, but his presence in the distance was a glimmer of the boy I had once known. The ceremony closed with quiet prayers, and the people of the town began to drift away, leaving flowers at the base of the bench. I remained a little longer, sitting on the stone, watching the waves lap gently against the pier. The inscription gleamed in the fading light, a reminder not of loss, but of duty fulfilled. As the sun slipped lower, painting the water in hues of gold, I whispered into the breeze, "You kept the harbor safe. Now it's my turn." The lake answered in its eternal rhythm, waves rolling against the rocks, carrying his memory outward like a tide that never ends. The house was quiet again, though the echoes of the memorial still lingered in its walls. Bouquets from neighbors lined the dining room table, their colors soft against the wood, and Richard's photograph rested beside them. I had spent the morning writing thank you notes, my pen moving slowly but deliberately across each card. Gratitude had a way of steadying me, reminding me of the community that had chosen to stand beside me. In the afternoon, as I sat at Richard's old desk overlooking the lake, the faint chime of my email broke the silence. I hesitated before opening it, a strange heaviness pressing down on me. When I clicked, I saw the sender, Ethan Monroe. The subject line was short, proposal. My chest tightened. I clicked it open, my eyes scanning the words. "Mom, I've been thinking since the memorial. Amelia believes we should create a partnership, merge the estate assets with her family's ventures. She says it would be mutually beneficial, a way to modernize what Dad left behind. I want you to consider it. We could make something new together. Please respond." I leaned back in the chair, staring at the screen. His tone was measured, polite, but I could feel Amelia's fingerprints in every line. The language was hers, mutually beneficial, modernize, merge. None of it sounded like my son. I closed my eyes and breathed in the scent of the chamomile tea cooling beside me. Richard had always teased me about that tea, calling it your anchor in a storm. I lifted the cup now, inhaling its gentle fragrance, and felt its warmth steady me. My gaze drifted to the silver hairpin resting in the dish on the desk, catching the light of the setting sun. Then to Richard's coat, folded neatly across the chair, and finally to the lake beyond the window, its waves rolling with quiet persistence. Everything in that moment reminded me of the man who had trusted me to protect what mattered, not to gamble it away. I turned back to the screen and opened a new reply. My fingers hovered over the keys for a long moment before I began to type. "Ethan, I received your message. I will not be participating. The estate is not meant for merging or for ventures that erase what your father built. It will remain as he intended, for the harbor, for the community, and for the generations to come. I hope someday you will understand. Mom." I read the words twice, then pressed send. A finality settled over me, heavy and liberating all at once. I knew Amelia would seethe, would twist my refusal into another accusation. But I also knew this was the line Richard had asked me to hold, the line I had promised myself I would never cross. I closed the laptop, pushed it gently aside, and carried my tea to the porch. The evening light spread gold across Lake Michigan, the waves shimmering as though the water itself breathed with me. I sat in Richard's chair, the hairpin secure in my hair, the steam of the tea curling upward in soft ribbons. For the first time in months, I felt a deep exhale leave my body, a release I hadn't realized I was holding. The battles, the accusations, the whispers, all of them had led to this moment of quiet certainty. I had chosen not only to guard Richard's legacy, but to guard my own peace. I sipped the tea slowly, letting the warmth spread through me. I thought of the families who would receive scholarships, of the students who would cross thresholds into brighter futures, of the harbor that would continue to hum with life long after my name was forgotten. That was enough. That was everything. The lake stretched endlessly before me, vast and unconquered. I whispered into the wind, a question meant for those listening from afar. If you had to choose between keeping the peace and keeping your boundaries, which would you choose? The waves answered with their steady rhythm, neither loud nor soft, simply constant. I leaned back, closing my eyes as the last light of day touched my face. In that quiet moment, with chamomile on my lips and the silver hairpin glinting in my hair, I understood that my story was not one of loss, but of reclamation. It was never about the $60 million. It was about dignity, about legacy, about holding the line when the world expected you to yield. It was about finding healing, not in victory over others, but in peace within yourself. And as the night settled in around me, I felt Richard's presence in the wind off the lake, a gentle assurance that I had done exactly what he knew I would.